If all goes according to plan, later on in the course of this week, the Southern African Development Community, EAC and COMESA will all essentially start the process of forming the biggest free trade area in Africa. The numbers, of course, are enticing. $1 trillion in GDP, 600 million people in population, and on top of that, 26 different countries. Ultimately, though, we have to ask, will this just be another enormous bombshell like the Yamoussoukro Declaration, which essentially went nowhere? We'll find out shortly. Welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. I'm Ramanyang. Here's what's coming up. Vandalism in Soweto as power protesters turn their anger on innocent businesses. And coffee farmers in Cameroon are mapping out ways to revive their fortunes. Right, and let's start in South Africa. Residents of Soweto have looted several stores there amid protests over power shortages. Now, local police officers say the protest started on Sunday afternoon among the residents of Dube Hostel when the power supply was cut as part of the normal schedule of controlled power outages. South Africa's ailing state utility, Eskom, has been implementing scheduled blackouts and price increases as it struggles to bring new capacity online in order to match power demand. Police say 2 ATMs, a liquor store and a fast food outlet were looted, but no one was hurt or arrested. Residents are also unhappy with the introduction of prepaid electricity meters. Eskom, however, argues that these meters will assist clients in managing their power consumption and minimize the need for load shedding altogether. Right then, let's expand this conversation. Sumitra Naidu joins us live from Johannesburg. Katie Gregory is live in London. Sumitra, let's start with you. This problem of illegal connections, just how pervasive is it, not just in Soweto, but across South Africa as a whole, and how much does Eskom lose to it annually?
Yes, Rama, the problem is quite widespread, but more prevalent in the townships, rural and outlying areas across the country. Eskom loses millions to these illegal connections. So it doesn't only come down to people stealing electricity. Once the cables are tampered with, Eskom has to send out technicians to reconnect and repair the lines, and also to put in new security measures, fencing off, etc. All of this adds up and adds to the utilities balance sheet. And this has been going on for a long time. Several years ago, Eskom launched Operation Kanyisa to curb illegal connections and cable theft. It was also an operation focused on education, as cable interference often leaves live wires that have caused hundreds of people, mostly children, that were injured, and many did as a result of playing near loose cables. Heavy fines were also imposed, still being imposed. Operation Kanyisa, though, is, well, it's still running. Unfortunately, though, for Eskom, it hasn't been enough to stop this crime problem. Earlier this year, Eskom said it was losing around $200 million to illegal connections and cable theft.
Indeed. Katie, Fitch essentially cited the lack of reliable electricity as a growth barrier to South Africa, but it didn't go ahead to then downgrade the country's credit rating outright. Why is that?
Well, while power is a major hindrance at the moment for South Africa's economy, as we know, particularly for manufacturing and mining, and Eskom is junk status, the debts are actually guaranteed by the government, obviously. So looking at the sovereign risk, many analysts would say the country's debt levels as a whole are reasonably manageable at this point. The government was warned its ratings would be downgraded back in March, but since then it says it's addressing the power supply problems at the highest level, and that, combined with the recent change in leadership at the helm of Eskom, installing the new boss, has come as positive news and impacted that decision by Fitch. But at the same time, there's still more to do. Fitch warned that the negative outlook for South Africa reflects other risk factors as well, including weaker GDP.
Sumitra, now that local councils, at least these essentially collectively owe Eskom over $400 million, have put plans to service the debt in play, to what extent does that ease Eskom's finances to a certain extent?
Well, Eskom is hoping to recoup in the region of $900 million, $400 million from the 20 municipalities that you're speaking of that are in arrears, and $20 million just from the Soweto township, which definitely will ease up some pressure on its balance sheet. However, it may take a while before the entire outstanding debt will be recovered. So Eskom says it's reached agreements with almost all of the municipalities, 18 out of the 20 to be exact, but failed to give a figure on how much those municipalities have actually paid to it. But it seems most of the municipalities have committed to payment agreements, which just means that they will make steady payments and work towards clearing that debt eventually. So it may not be immediate cash in hand for Eskom.
Indeed, and the other two, of course, eventually had the dispute going all the way to court. Katie, there's been quite a fierce internal debate in South Africa and a lot of pressure to split up Eskom, or at least to a certain extent privatize some of its assets. But is there external pressure from investors on your end for that to happen as well?
Well, most of the problems with Eskom are structural, and that's unlikely to be resolved in the short term. And we did hear about 2 to 3 weeks ago the Treasury said it had been told to look into plans into perhaps partially privatising, saying they wanted to evaluate all options. In terms of politics, the unions hate the idea of privatisation, as do left-leaning members of the ANC. They've all strongly opposed it, arguing it would lead to job losses and undermine efforts to expand grid access. Analysts would say foreign investors would probably like the idea of partial or full privatisation, but you have to look at the wider political context. The ANC is losing steam. The last thing the government needs leading into 2016 elections would be to lose trade union support. So I would say investors at the moment probably rank lower on government priorities than electorate sentiment.
Indeed, of course, for the ANC, privatisation by itself is quite the dirty word. Sumitra, it seems there have been slightly less load shedding ever since a change in management at the top of Eskom. What is Mr. Molefe doing differently compared to his predecessor?
Well, I do think it's still early days and good timing in terms of power supply for Mr. Molefe. The first bit of power is coming through from Medupi and the Koeberg nuclear reactor, and it's managed to stabilize a power supply for now. Mr. Molefe has been receiving some really good reviews, but he does have, a really good track record, which is why the board was so keen on appointing him. His past successes included Transnet, another government parastatal that's done fairly well. Eskom's chairman, Ben Ngomane, singing Molefe's praises recently, talking of the new CEO's strong leadership. He's developed good relationships with managers at the various power stations and has introduced some new synergies to the management and running of the utility, one of which is close coordination between the maintenance program and the Eskom control room, which manages grid supply and demand. Now, the chairman also pointed out that morale amongst employees at Eskom had improved significantly since Molefe's arrival. So it just seems that Molefe is being cheered for his leadership style at the utility so far.
Indeed, we'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for your input. That's Sumitra Naidu live in Johannesburg, and at the same time, Katie Gregory live in London. Now, the case for a continental free trade area stems from a set of, frankly, dismal trade statistics. You see, Africa might be home to some of the fastest growing economies on the planet, like Ethiopia, for example, but as a total, it doesn't really trade much within itself. Let me explain what I'm talking about. If you take total trade within Africa as a percentage of its trade with the rest of the planet, it's actually fairly small, about 10 to 12% on average. Now compare that with the likes of North America at 40%, Europe even higher, and Asia at about 30%. And you get to understand the scale of the problem. There's lots of untapped potential in here. To fix this problem, however, you need scale. You've got 50 plus countries in here. So one of the ideas that are being put into place right now is this: combine the East African community, the Southern African Development Community, and COMESA into one massive free trade area spanning Cairo to Cape Town in the literal sense of the word. And then some interesting numbers start to come into play. Population over 600 million people, 26 different countries, and a combined GDP of over $1 trillion US. Now, at this point, of course, critics might ask, yeah, but FTAs, we've heard a lot of noise about them in Africa. There are plenty of other continental initiatives that you guys have put on the table which haven't really worked. So let's look at the example of COMESA, for example. The year 2000, trade within COMESA member states, back then somewhere around 18 or 19, was just about $3 billion. Fast forward to 2010, and it's increased by a factor of just about 5. That's a fairly interesting number. It gives you an idea of the scale of potential that this continental free trade area could achieve. The thing is, getting to that point from where we are today Well, there are plenty of obstacles that need to be dealt with. And the first of those, of course, is infrastructure. It's no point having an FTA if you can't get your goods from Durban, say, to Tanzania, if there are no roads and if you've got no rail or server to get it to that particular point. But this is relatively straightforward to deal with, and governments have started to pay a lot more attention to this particular problem over the last decade. The more nagging one, however, is this: tariff and non-tariff barriers. There's a lot of protectionism that takes place within sub-Saharan Africa. Kenya, for example, still shields her sugar farmers, even though they're completely non-competitive compared to everyone else on the sub-Saharan continent. And that, of course, is a problem. Convincing African states to open up their markets to the free movement of people, goods and capital is the biggest barrier to getting this free trade area off the ground. Indeed, some might call it the disease of protectionism. That said, the tripartite summit on the establishment of a free trade area resumed its sessions in Sharm el-Sheikh on Monday. Delegations from 26 countries, which I mentioned earlier, representing the three trade blocs of the Southern African Development Community, the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, and the East African Community, are working on a merger, which, if successful, will create a pretty large free trade area. Yasser Hakim was there.
It was time for the ministers to congregate and review the final draft of the FTA. Technical advisors had submitted the plan to the ministers, but with 1 day left to sign the declaration, they worked hard to resolve their differences.
We still have a long way ahead of us before this agreement enters into force. We need to finalize our negotiations on the exchange of tariff offers, the rules of origin and trade remedies. We must complete the ratification procedures. In addition, let's be realistic. We will face unforeseen challenges, but the rewards are definitely worth the efforts needed to overcome those challenges.
For some countries, the differences should not be an obstacle to the launch of this grand scheme.
Ethiopia has a comprehensive view when it comes to regional integration. And we have been at the forefront of Africa's integration agenda, and Ethiopia has been always supporting the regional integration effort. Ethiopia has been investing a lot on its infrastructure development, both on energy and road and railway and communication infrastructure to connect with our neighbors. And that we are successfully doing, and we are a pioneer from Africa when it comes to that.
Indeed, major infrastructure projects are needed to facilitate the transportation of goods around the continent. And it's been announced here that the long-awaited Cairo to Cape Town road will be inaugurated in 2016. It will go a long way in uniting African economies and boost trade. But experts say African countries should quickly improve their industries and services to withstand the expected competition from merging the three blocs.
We need to invest a lot on infrastructure connectivity, enhancement of infrastructure in the region to connect it together, and also we need to boost our production capabilities and productivity of the economy, and we need to transform our economies, and also we need to trade more within ourselves.
In spite of the differences that were evident in the meetings on Sunday and Monday, now everything seems to be set up. The ministers have drafted a final plan to be signed and officially launched by the heads of states and governments who will be here in Sharm el-Sheikh on Wednesday. Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Sharm el-Sheikh.
Now, of course, Yasser Hakim has been covering the meeting, but the first stage of that, what hopefully will be a continental free trade area, will be launched. He joins us now live from the Egyptian resort city. Yasser, walk us through the main areas of differences here between the three trade blocs that are represented. What sort of solutions are being put on the table?
Well, the differences are concerning free trade, concerning tariffs, zero tariffs. A lot of countries are calling for stages, not to release tariffs completely because they need to protect their industries to be ready for the competition and for exports from other countries. You've also got the issue of rules of origin, and that is also another problem that the countries are still putting in the basic principles for it. And they haven't reached a deal. I must say that although the declaration will be announced on Wednesday, it will be signed by the heads of states and governments of the three blocs, However, there are still issues outstanding. There are still issues like those two that have not been resolved. I've asked them a few times, the ministers and officials here, how are you going to resolve it? They said, we still have time for more negotiations, but we want to get a consensus on the issue so that we don't find that some countries are adopting it and others are not. So, and when you ask them what are the steps, what are the proposals, you're not given an answer at all. But from our talks with experts, we know that there is expected a gradual zero tariff procedure whereby there will be a list of products that will be exempted from each country, will propose a list. And what they're trying to do is shorten this list as much as possible.
Indeed. Let's talk about agriculture, because a lot of sub-Saharan economies have agriculture as an enormous component of that, and it tends to be very fiercely protected, especially from external exports. How is this free trade area and the ministers, their lack of answers notwithstanding, how are they going to deal with this?
Again, they refused to talk about it. They just said that the will is there, the intentions are there, and that these countries are going to sign the declaration, so they are willing to give up some of the tariffs at least after 2 years. It will not be effective immediately. It will take around 2 years to be active, and it will work. They're saying it will be a give and take. Countries that are strong agriculturally will benefit from other countries that are strong industrially. They will merge together. They will complete each other rather than compete with each other. For example, if you have a product, it can be produced in Cairo and another segment that is produced in Nairobi, and it can, both of them, be put together and assembled in Ethiopia. So they're saying they have this dream of total compatibility by the African states in these three blocks.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for your input. That's Yasser Hakim live there in Sharm el-Sheikh. He'll be there most of this week, of course, covering the talks leading up to the signing of that declaration later on Wednesday. Now, earlier on, he spoke to the Egyptian Minister of Trade and Industry, Munir Fakhri Abdel Noor, who says that he's confident that the final points of disagreement, as you just heard, will be worked out.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for joining us on CCTV. First of all, what's the latest concerning the meetings at the FTA tripartite summit here in Sharm el-Sheikh?
The ministers of trade are meeting to put the final touches on the agreement that is going to be signed on Wednesday during the summit. It is something big. I think it will allow members of that free trade area to grow, to enjoy the benefits of economies of scale, to take advantage of the complementarities between the different countries and different regions, and more important, or as important, to increase their bargaining position within the international organizations.
There were some issues that have not been resolved in phase one. What is the latest concerning these issues, and will they affect the final draft and signing of the declaration?
We are signing the free trade area. All the details, and those are important details, including the rules of origin, including the reduction of tariffs and the schedule of reduction. All this is still subject to negotiations. Negotiations that will not be difficult. It will not be difficult because, as you see, it is a merger between three regional free trade areas. We know what we're talking about. The three free trade areas have dealt with the problems of the rules of origin, have dealt with the problems of tariff reduction and so on. Will take into consideration the different needs of countries, the difference in the economic strength, if you will.
We know that several states have been rejecting or resisting the FTA, feeling that it could affect their local industries. They were not up to the competition and could lose out from being a member at the FTA.
What's the latest on that? And is Egypt also having these concerns?
No, Egypt is not one of those countries who is afraid of competition. We have a free trade agreement with the EU. We have free trade agreements with the Arab countries. We have a free trade agreement with Turkey. We have negotiated a free trade agreement with the Mercosur. I mean, on the contrary, I think we want to compete. Competition is what will push us to improve our production, which will push us to become more competitive, and we welcome that.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for joining us.
Quick run through the markets for you today. All the markets that we track started the week firmly in the red, including, of course, the Kenyan bourse, the NSE 20 down about 4761.44. Some changes in the corporate side. Ade Ayemi named, of course, as a successor to Albert Essien at the helm of EcoBank. There's a bit of a gap in between the time Mr. Essien steps down and Mr. Ayemi comes in. The board, of course, will be making arrangements to have a transitional CEO in between those two periods of time. Time for a short break. We're back in 60 with more business from across Africa.
Effects of the austerity measures are evident and were expected. Egyptians, however, seem to be patient about it. But El-Sisi told government he wants to control the prices promptly before people's patience runs out.
Welcome back to the program. You're still watching Global Business Africa. Let's move on to Uganda. There are fears that the heavy traffic in that country's capital, Kampala, is essentially stifling the nation's economy. City planners say the jams threaten Uganda's regional competitiveness, as well as its attractiveness as a tourist destination and a place to live and work. However, as Michael Baleki reports, authorities there insist they have a plan to deal with the congestion.
Rush hour in Kampala. Geoffrey Wako is a cab driver. He operates within the central business area, but at peak times, he says he is losing potential customers to the congestion.
For example, I would run for 30 minutes, you go for 2 hours, 1.5. That means it is really obstructing my movements and my income. It is reduced. Where I would go 3-4 times, sometimes I have a lot of calls from clients, but I can't respond to all of them in time.
In Uganda, road transport carries over 95% of the country's goods and about 99% of passengers. Figures from 2008, since when the congestion has worsened, suggested Uganda was losing more than $160,000 every day as a result of Kampala traffic jams.
The challenge is that we only have one city, and that is Kampala. So everyone is struggling to come to Kampala because that's where the services are. Good schools, good hospitals, etc. So this has tended to put pressure on the activities within the capital city.
A combination of other factors like narrow roads, high population growth rate, and poor physical planning resulting in the construction of unplanned structures has worsened the situation. But city authorities say they have a master plan which will include the revival of the bus and passenger train services.
We are coming up with certain designated routes where people can only walk there and walk comfortably. So there is no competition for space with vehicles or borders, but that is in place. We are also dreaming big, and we have shared the story of the possibility of the cable cars.
However, urban planners say the intended city plan should be broadened to include areas outside the central business district.
I think there has to be a deliberate effort to expand the urban space and also establish new cities within Uganda.
According to city authorities, Kampala was designed to to accommodate between 600,000 and 800,000 people, but the population now stands over 4 million. City planners say the reduction of traffic jams will be a gradual process, but that will require proper planning and strict implementation of the available laws. So there is no immediate end in sight to the queues. Michael Baleke, CCTV, Kampala.
Now, elsewhere, players in Cameroon's coffee sector have gathered in Douala to thrash out plans to revive that country's once bountiful local coffee sector. Farmers have been steadily drifting away from the crop in recent years in tandem with a fall in international coffee prices. However, with prices going up once again, some farmers think they now have an incentive to boost production.
Cameroon is famous for its great quality coffee, and this festival seeks to celebrate that tradition. Industry stakeholders from around the nation are here in a bid to boost the flagging industry. While the coffee quality may still be there, the quantity has been dwindling. Local bodies say there was more than a 50% decrease in production in 2013, down from 38,000 tonnes to slightly over 16,000 tonnes.
Coffee production has considerably dropped, and it's better to leave it behind us. Production has plummeted, but according to me, as you can see, the CICC has launched this promotion. Cameroon is fighting to increase production, but other than that, for now, production is very low.
Due to the lower international prices, farmers have been opting to grow other crops and abandoning the once lucrative plant. This festival aims to redress the trend, promoting coffee to local consumers in a bid to boost demand and encourage farmers to come back to the industry.
The objective of the ceremony is to incite Cameroonians to consume and to continue consuming coffee. As I said earlier, the consumption of coffee within different production countries will allow us to have more profit, as the coffee will be manufactured and consumed here.
In 1992, Cameroon was ranked 12th largest coffee producer in the world. Last year, it was ranked 30th. It's hoped the nation will soon be climbing back towards the top of the rankings. Andrew Thompson, CCTV.
Finally, some interesting tech news. The world's first artificial leg capable of simulating the feelings of a normal limb and fighting phantom pain has been unveiled by researchers in Vienna. Surgeons there first rewired the remaining foot nerve endings from a patient's stump to healthy tissue in the thigh, placing them close to the skin surface. Now, 6 sensors were then placed on the sole of a lightweight prosthetic and then linked to stimulators inside the shaft where the stump sits. This is not the first time the Austrian scientist has caused quite the stir with his research. In 2010, he presented a mind-controlled prosthetic arm, which a user directed the neurons previously connected to the lost limb. Right then, quick run through currencies here for you. Of course, South Africa's rand had an absolute bashing on Friday last week, one to forget. 12.59, the relevant number in trading today. We're also keeping a close eye on the Kenyan shilling. Will it actually get round to around 95 following tomorrow's Monetary Policy Committee meeting? We'll find out in the next 24 hours. For now, though, that's it for this edition of Global Business. As always, we value your feedback on the program. globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com is the email address to use. As always, the news continues on Facebook and on Twitter. I'll see you over there. I'm Ramanya.